Hey guys, so let's discuss about a potential UX issue here. UX basically stands for user experience. So if I open the terminal and if I click on refresh, what you can see is that there's a white screen, and that white screen all of a sudden turns into this anime component, right? And the reason for this is if you see in the home component, you're basically trying to perform an API call, right? And this API call is nothing but making a request to a server, and that server is giving us this detail, right? And once we have this detail, we are obviously rendering it. But the problem here is that this operation takes some time, right? And in those time, the user is able to see only white screen, and this is a really bad experience for a user because user doesn't know that if anything is happening or not. So in such scenarios, we have to show some kind of indication that okay, things are loading. So what we can do is we can create a state called as loading, and corresponding to that we can have a setter function which is set loading, and we'll initialize it with as false. Now what we'll do is whenever this function, which essentially performs the fetch request, whenever this function is called, we'll first make this state as true, and this fetch operation basically returns a promise. So if the promise is successful, then this will come to the then block. If there is any kind of error, it will come to the catch block. We also have something called as finally. This finally block will execute irrespective there is a success or if there is a failure. So in the finally block, we can say that set loading as false. Let me quickly reiterate. We created a state called as loading, and in the loading, what we have done is that whenever this function, which is performing the network request, whenever this function gets called, we are changing the state as true. So loading becomes true, and whenever this fetch operation completes, whether it's a success or whether it's a failure, irrespective of that, if this operation is completed, we are making this loading state as false. And the reason is that what now we can say is, we can say if loading is true, what we want to return is activity indicator. So activity indicator is a component again provided by React Native, which shows that some activity is happening. So let me, if I save this thing and if I restart the server, we still don't see anything. The reason we don't see anything is because we need to create a view, and in the view we'll say that style as flex1. Now if I save it and if I refresh it, we still don't see anything. The reason we don't see anything is because we are just writing, okay, if it's loading, then we are just writing a JSX, but we are not returning. So what we'll do is now we'll return the JSX, and once we do that, we see that there is an error because we'd have to get rid of the semicolon. Okay, now if I refresh again, you can see that there was some kind of thing happening, right? So basically there is a spinner. Let me increase the size. So this activity indicator gets a prop called as size. Now you can see that whenever I refresh, the user will see an activity indicator. Let's bring this to center. In order to do that, we can just add two more properties: justify content as center and align items as center. Once we do that, now you can see that we have an activity indicator here. So now what happens whenever user comes, the application starts. Now user will see that there is a okay spinner, which indicates the user that okay, there is some kind of activity happening, and user will be patient that okay, I'll wait for this activity to finish, right? So this is how we have this loading state, and by using this loading state, we are basically showing an activity indicator. So what I'll suggest is something similar you can do for the anime detail screen. So let's me open this screen. When I open the screen, still data loaded very fast. But yeah, for this screen, you saw that initially there was a white screen for a couple of milliseconds. So what you can do is you can come to the anime detail screen and you can perform something similar, right? You can write a loading state here. You can change the loading state whenever this function gets called and whenever this function's execution stops. And the same you can use here, and you can write a condition: if it is loading, then return the activity indicator, else you'll be returning this, the whole UI, right? So this is how we can have the loading state. Thank you guys.